You are listening to the Primetime Podcast with your hosts, Bryant Chisel and Jake Jorgensen. Hey, what's going on, guys? Got a little different rewind for us this week today. We already released a show this week, but I wanted to give out an update on the history book, which you're kind of looking at now. I have it really zoomed in just to make it a little more readable. I have this on a Google Sheet. I've been working on it for quite some time, kind of on and off. It's probably been like 2 years. So there's a ton of data to parse through. So I've been writing a bunch of scripts in Google Sheets and learning how to do all that stuff. Been a fantastic time. Yay. So I don't think I've gone through this yet in the past. Maybe a couple pieces of it here and there. But I just finished it this morning. So I know I haven't gone through the whole thing. I want to run through the history book and give, for all you degenerates out there that are really interested in the history of this league, because this league's been going on for 15 years. I know not everybody in this league, most people in this league haven't been in it that long. I think Lane and I are the only two that have been in it the entire time. Brinkman's been in it for a long time. Lemons has been in it for a long time. I think those are probably the longest standing managers. Sorry if I missed anybody. I don't think I did. Jake hasn't been in it that long, but he's been cooking it, so fuck you, Jake. So I think in a typical year, going forward, this kind of history book summary will be carried in. It'll be covered in just the last rewind of the year where we go through the championship game. It should be pretty quick normally. Just kind of, I'll probably just go over what changed on any given year, right? So I won't go through and say, oh yeah, back in 2017, Lane had the best record that this league's ever seen. Wow, cool. I'm going to go through that in this episode, so it'll be a little longer, or a lot longer than it would normally be, because we haven't gone through it yet. So I just want to give everybody a lay of the land where everything stands now, and then going forward in future years, it'll just be a, hey, what changed kind of thing. So I guess without further ado, we can start breaking these down a bit. It's just me today. I didn't want to pull Jake in for something like this. I could, but it doesn't have to be that big of a thing. So the first record that I went through and scripted was the total record in a single season. So your best records. Like I said, Lane tops this record. Kudos. All these records, by the way, will have a top 10. I'm sure there's a ton of teams that went 11-2, right, or 11-3. This is sorted by win percentage. So some of those teams with an extra game now may have an advantage or disadvantage, I guess, depending on how you look at it. But a lot of 12-2s. So we have, obviously their total record, their win percentage. These are their average points for and against that year, just because I thought that might be an interesting little tidbit. And then the year that it happened in. So Lane honestly kind of dominates this. He's got 4 in the top 6, 5 in the top 8. So kudos to Lane. He's had some pretty dominant teams in the past. They've all been recent, for the most part. 2013 was a pretty darn good year for him. But other than that, it's been kind of 2018 and beyond. I guess I say recent. That's, holy man, like 5, 6, 7 years ago. Jeez. So I guess it's just interesting to me to see, some of the average points for, like Jake, this 12-2 team, almost 170 points per week is disgusting. You see your average points against teams that, get scored on a ton but still had good records. Laner in 2018, same year as Jake, dominating, had a pretty high points against, so it makes you wonder if those two losses came against Jake putting up monster games or something. But that's where the total record stands. Pretty interesting. I guess not all of you know, or at least were in the league when some of these people were in. So Dylan S here is Dylan Schimmelfennig. Back in the day, he used to be in this league. Um, I don't think anybody else in here. Yeah, everybody else here is actually current, which I find actually quite interesting. Move on to the largest margin of victory. So this is defined as obviously the difference between the two scores. I did throw out a bunch of games that someone, back in the day, we didn't really have any rules or anything. We weren't playing for money or anything like that. So if a team got knocked out, they wouldn't start their lineup. So the criteria for that was if they had 2 or more players projected for 0, right? Didn't score because they were injured or not playing for whatever reason, then that game didn't count. So these are all quote unquote legit margins of victory on legit matchups. Apparently, I smacked Josh by over 126 points. These are all, honestly, they're all pretty close, which it's pretty neat, I suppose. Back in 2015, Jake slaps George, and now, oh, how the tables have turned because George owns Jake. Nick on Nick crime. Nick B's on the receiving end. A couple of these. Lemons. Bryce Hansen was in the league for a couple years. Manthai, Cade, yeah, you can look for yourself. Pretty cool. This is one of the only ones that I think I have the top of. The smallest margin of victory, which honestly I find even more interesting. These are the tightest games that this league has ever seen in the history of the league. Same rules apply, but obviously if teams aren't setting lineups, then, well, probably don't have a tight margin of victory. But the same rules do apply for this. George and Nick B in 2016 had a .06 game. Game decided by, a couple quarterback yards. It's kind of crazy. Cade, Hoffman. Hoffman's been on the. Hoffman and Brinkman have been on the receiving side of a couple tough ones, it looks like. I've benefited from a few. Lemons, quite a few. Thankfully, Brinkman's got a few, so he makes it back there. No Hoffman on this side, so that's tough for Nick. Carter Bell was in the league for a year or two, I think. Isaac Painting, I think, was in the league for just 1 year, maybe 2. I think it was just the first year. The first year, I think we had 8 teams. No, it might be 10. I think we went down to 8 in 2011, and then went back to 10 for like the rest of the history of the league. There was a brief period of time though where we had 8 teams. I don't remember if it was for 1 or 2 years. So there's some tight ones there. 0.06 would be tough, man. That would be tough. All right. Hardest strength of schedule. This is classified as your opponent's points for, right? So your average points against. Most of these teams you'd expect to have pretty low records because of the nature of the beast. Some of them have pretty good records, though, I think, which is a testament to how good their roster was that year and kind of just how much they got unlucky, right? They got shafted a bit. So Brandon got shafted a bit in 2022, it looks like, finishing 7-7 with it, which is a pretty, reasonable record, especially for giving up 142 points per game. Jeez, he's got the Joe Barry defense going on. There's some real stinkers in here, as you'd expect. Bryce went 8-6. That's the best record on this list for 140 back in 2015. Yeah, I mean, with a better schedule, that's probably a 10, 12 win season. So that's tough. Because most of these teams, if not all of them, didn't make the playoffs, right? 7-7 and 8-6 might have got you there, maybe. The rest of these probably not. So, thankfully, I'm not on this list. So, must be commissioner's privilege, Easiest strength of schedule, similar stat. Obviously, just flipped. So these are a team's lowest average points against. I'm pretty sure I threw out games in this category too that were up against opponents that didn't set their lineup. So I believe that's tossed as well. So shouldn't have to worry about that here. So Brandon Colgan, I think he just played for 1 year. 102.8. That would be nice. Apparently, nobody else has gotten even close to that. Lot of 2010 season back when nobody knew how to play fantasy football. We were just kids. What was that, like sixth grade? I want to say fifth grade, something like that. For most of us, at least. So a lot of cupcake schedules. It looks like, which is funny because not a lot of very good records in that group either. So those teams just stunk. It looks like. You'd expect to see pretty high records in this group. Laner, nice. If you don't have a good record in this group, then your team probably stunk and you just got lucky. Laner a couple times, Hoffy, and myself back in 2010. I won it this year. I think Hoffy won it this year, and Lane might have won it in 2012. Ooh, tough to remember. I think that's how it went. So, a couple good ones there. Longest win streak, which we did have an update this year. Yeah, this is the first update to this sheet from this year. Greg coming in third place here, absolutely massive. I think I mentioned on the previous rewind. I said earlier in the season when this happened that Greg would have been top of the group. I had this scripting done. This record existed in the spreadsheet. However, there was a bug in my code, and anything that started with a 1 here was filtered down. So I didn't see Lane and Jake. They weren't showing at the top. So all I saw was me at the top. And I said, oh, Greg's on a 10-game win streak. That's going to be number 1. Thanks for knocking me off there, Greg. But yeah, sorry, Greg. Not true. Third place is very respectable, though. I do allow this record to carry over between seasons. So if it does, that's why you see multiple years here. This doesn't mean that they had 2 separate win streaks in those years. So, a couple big ones here. If it's carrying over between years, most likely it's because a team won a championship, or at least their last regular season game of the year. I guess if they went on a little win streak at the end of the year. But I think most of these were coming off ships. Lanes might not have. I don't remember if he won it in 2017. I know he made the championship game in 18, but I don't know if he won it in 17. So I think Hoffy, he won it this year, I'm pretty sure. I think he won it back-to-back years around that time. All right, moving on. I like these stats here coming up. Highest percentage of playoff appearances. So for however many years you were in the league, how many times you made the playoffs. This will be a little skewed towards players that weren't really in the league very much. Like Sydney Cocking was in the league for a couple years. She made it the playoffs both years. Brandon Colgan, same thing, was in it for 1 year, made the playoffs. So they're kind of cemented as the top of this list. I'll consider having some sort of minimum threshold, but I don't know if it's really that fair. It's kind of just an arbitrary threshold to just kick people out of the top if I do that. So maybe I can make it like active players, but I don't know if it's really that deep. I might just leave it. I do plan in the future. I don't have this done yet, but in the future I plan on having like tabs down at the bottom of the screen, which I've cut off for this recording because I have a bunch of stuff down there for doing the scripting that'll get hidden later. But I plan on having a tab for each player that's been in the league, and it's got more personalized stats. So for example, I have like a little mock-up of my tab with just some ideas on it. So it'll have like total record in the history of the league, win percentage, record versus players. So it'll have like all the managers that I've gone up against, and then the records versus them. Your top scorers of all time. So if I had Arian Foster for a long time, which he didn't play that long, but for example, then he'd top this list. Playoff appearances might just be a raw number here. I'm kind of massaging this yet. I came up with this last year, I think, and haven't gotten to it yet because turns out writing all these scripts is a ton of work. I spent like all day yesterday, like 8 hours just doing it. and that was only like, I don't know, a tenth of the work that I've put into this thing. So this is taking a ton of time. So I hope people appreciate it. I'll probably post a link to it, I guess. Why not? In case anybody wants to look at it. Otherwise, obviously, you can always come back to this video. It'll have your average points for and against all time. You know, these are more all time stats, I guess, for all of the times that for however long you've been in the league, right? So basically, every manager to be in the league, yeah, the goal is to have a tab for each one of them. So I think it'll be interesting. Just a bunch of ideas there, but a little sneak peek. So that's why I think I might leave this and just have your own, playoff appearances on here if you're not in there. Thankfully, for active players, Jake's top. He's only not made the playoffs once, I believe. That last year, I want to say he made the playoffs this year, right? Oh, I have to look. Pretty sure he did. 2024. Yeah, he did this year. Okay. Must have been last year then that he didn't. No, I don't remember. He made it last year too, I'm pretty sure. Whatever, who cares? Jake didn't make it once. I've been in the league 15 years, same as Laner. I made the playoffs 11 times, Lane 9. Good to see my percentage up there, even if I'm pretty sure I only have one win in the history of the league, which is unfortunate. Yeah, look at that. Tough. George, 10 years. Attaboy, George, decade. 60% of the time. It feels like George's teams are either really good or really bad, so that makes sense. Greg's making his way up here. This probably fluctuates quite a bit every year just because of the small sample size. Relatively speaking, these percentages can swing pretty high from just making the playoffs and not making the playoffs. Offie was pretty solid. Josh Schultz is the last one on this list, 50%. Here we've got most championships. Jake and Brinkman, only guys to ever have 3. Laner and Hoffman dropping 2 bombs. And then Brandon, Manthai, George, Josh, and myself are the only other ones to ever win the league. So, Greg, congrats for being number 10. I guess you were the lucky winner on the script. They liked you the most. Your highest playoff win percentage. This is where it falls apart for me. I'm not even on this list, even though I'm in the playoffs all the time, which makes sense because I only have 1 win. So, Brinkman's playoff win percentage, 87.5%. This is updated, by the way, for this year. So, big there. Not that Nick made the playoffs this year. Josh shooting 75%. Brandon 75%. Only a couple losses from these guys. Manthai. Laner, for being in the playoffs as often as he is, has a pretty high win percentage. I know he's made it to quite a few championship games. I don't think he's won 2. But given how many times he's been in the playoffs, I think this is a pretty impressive number. Same with Jake. Obviously, Jake's won it a handful of times. So, and then the rest of these teams have kind of just done it once. So, lowest playoff win percentage. Now this is where I shine, baby. 40%. Not very good. My team chokes in the playoffs. Brandon Colgan made it in the playoffs and has 2 losses apparently. Lemons, 22% is not good, buddy. The lowest win percentage of all active players right there. Cade shooting 37.5% from the hip, and that's it for active players. This is between these 2 lists, you've got most of the players that have been in the league. Obviously, there's more 50-50s, right, that are tied in there, but pretty much everybody's covered because we haven't had that many people in the league. All right, so this section here is for team scoring, right? So these are just most team points in a year. We have, in 2018, Jake had 2,362 points. That averages out to almost 170 per week, which is ridiculous. That's a crazy number to average. If you average like 140 plus, right, your team is good. To do this, that's insane. That's gonna be a tough one to catch because there's a pretty big jump here. And honestly, Lane's on a bit of an island too. The top 3 are all kind of on a few point islands here between Lane and 2018. Same year, too. What a crazy year. I believe this was Mahomes and Antonio Brown for Lane, and McCaffrey and Hopkins and a bunch of guys like that for Jake. I'm sure Jake's rattling off a bunch of the other guys in his head right now. Dylan Schimmelfing in 2014 apparently had a pretty impressive year as well. And then the rest of these are pretty darn close, so this is kind of where the groups merge back together. Offie, Greg in 2021, Offie again, myself, Brinkman, Laner, and Cade. These are just good teams that hopefully at least made it to the championship game, if not won it. Because averaging over 140, in my opinion, is pretty impressive. So none of those this year. Most team points in a single week. So this is the same stat as before, but instead of it being an average over the year, this is just a single week. Hoffman absolutely. So I show who did it, and then I also show who they did it against because I thought that'd be kind of fun. Hoffman absolutely obliterated Josh. 253 points he put up. Holy man. Actually, it's funny. I take that back. I don't think this was Josh getting obliterated. If I remember correctly, and I can look this up quick because I have the week listed and of the year. If I remember correctly, that was a relatively close game, all things considered. So back in 2014, in week 14, which would have been the last week of the regular season. Yeah, 253 to 206 was the final, which is pretty ridiculous. That was a heck of a matchup there, an all-timer, honestly. And Josh ended up going on to win the league that year, so kudos to Josh. Offie lost in the semifinals to Josh the next week. So take that L. Offie put up 121, Josh put up 185. So Offie may own the record here, but Josh got the title, so who's laughing at the end of the day? That's a big jump. There's a 231 here from Greg up against Laner. That's huge too. And then the rest of these are much closer together. Jake's got a couple back-to-back that are almost the same in back-to-back weeks, which I find quite funny. That's that nasty 2018 team. It's interesting to see Lane not on this list because Lane in 2018 averaged like 160. So I guess his team was more consistent than Jake's, it seems like. Not that Jake's was bad. Obviously, you don't top that record unless you have consistently good weeks. But Jake had more boom weeks, it seems. Bryce, Brandon, John Reckner, Bryce again, that 2016 and 2019 team, putting up some big points. Offie a couple times there to round it out. Conversely, we have the fewest team points in a single week. This also follows the same rule where it filters out weeks where somebody has started more than one person that didn't play. I leave one person in there that didn't play because, in my opinion, mistakes happen. People forget to set their lineups every now and then, or there are late inactives that somebody couldn't do anything about, or that type of stuff. I kind of want to leave that in there. So I give a one-player benefit. Not all of these are that situation, but I leave that. I leave that in there. So a couple years ago, Laner did something truly historic. Congrats, Lane. 43 points in a single week against Nick B. And I want to say that every single player on his team played in that too, which is even better because there are a lot of teams here that had a player out that was in their lineup. And Lane's, I don't believe his was. I can fact check quick. Schedule. Yeah, Lane's team name that year at the end of the year was Why Even Try? So, yeah, let's see. He had Tua with 1, Christian Kirk had 8, Deontay Johnson had 4, Najee had 7, Pollard had 2, Darren Waller had 5, Drake London had 4, Matt Gay was his top scorer with 9 points, and the LA defense with 2. So yeah, everybody played. They just all stunk. That's an all-time stinker from Lane there. And just in case anybody breaks his second place record, he's still got that first place record. He's back to back here. Very different years, but Yeah, Laner's the only person in this league to score below 50 points in a quote-unquote legit matchup. George has a couple back-to-backs here in the 50s. This year, Lemons, that all-time tank, we're talking about it all year long. This year, Lemons against Jake in Week 13 put up 58 almost. He did have one guy not play, but like I said, that still counts for this record. Manthai last year against me dropped a 60 banger. So, attaboy Manthai, putting yourself in the record book for all the wrong reasons. Then I'm in here in 2014. And yeah, that about rounds it out. All right, team statistics. This section was what I was working on for the most part yesterday. So, finally got it all ironed out. These are all going to be about, touchdowns, rushing, passing, receiving yards, that kind of stuff. Most touchdowns in a season, Laner owns that with 124, which I thought had to have been a mistake in my programming, because that is just so far and away higher than everybody else. Like a good week is, from what I had seen, was probably about 8 touchdowns, right? That's about a touchdown per guy, given that, you start quarterback, 2 receivers, 2 running backs, flex, tight end, right? That's 7 positions there. Maybe your defense gets a pick 6 or something. I counted those. Kickers, I don't think have ever really gotten touchdowns, but if they did, we counted them as Yahoo tracks fumble recoveries for touchdowns. I think that'd be the only way a kicker would really get one. Besides a receiving touchdown, I guess. I think Detroit did that to Green Bay a few years ago. But yeah, all that was counted for all positions, so whatever weird, wacky touchdowns should have all been counted here. I went through manually and added up all of Lane's touchdowns in that 2018 year, and yeah, I got the same thing. So that's bonkers. Jake in that same year, remember those two had that magical year in 2018. Jake had more points for, though, by a significant margin. So I guess he was just getting a ton more catches and a ton more yards, because that's a very significant number of I mean, this gap here is, 17 touchdowns. That's the same gap. Oh man, that's a bigger gap than 2nd to 10th, right? So huge gap here. Everybody else is pretty condensed. So Jake, Lane dominates this. Holy man, Lane, you've had some good teams over the years. Dylan, George, Brandon snuck in there. I snuck in there. John Reckner is in there. So nasty teams there. This is most touchdowns in a single week. Jake owns that in that year. 14 touchdowns in week 10 of 2018. And we got a lot of 12s, and then I'm sure there's a ton of 11s, right? This probably just goes on and on. So really, this is a 7 and up stat if you think about it. This one is passing yards in a season. Laner owns that too. I believe this 2018 year was when he had Mahomes, so it makes sense that Lane had Mahomes and Kelsey, I want to say. So that's why he had so many touchdowns and passing yards. Mahomes was absolutely dealing it that year. I think Russell Wilson was his backup. So a couple excellent years here from Lane. 5,500 yards is kind of bonkers. Now this is only in the starting lineup, right? This doesn't count bench points or bench yards. Same for all these stats. This only is counting your starting lineup, guys that were playing for your team. It does count, obviously, your quarterback, but it also, if your wide receivers or running backs threw passes, it would count that too. All that kind of stuff. I didn't discriminate between positions in your starting lineup. Just any player in your starting lineup, if they had that stat, it got added. So Laner in 2013, that's a heck of this is going to be tough to beat. This is by far and away the highest. I don't know who Lane's quarterback was in 2013. I'm taking a look right now. Maybe it was like Brady, Big Ben. I don't know. Lane. Oh, Peyton Manning. That would do it. Yeah, so Peyton Manning apparently absolutely cooked in 2013. Backup was Andrew Luck if he needed a spot start on a bye week, it looks like. So he was obviously great in his time too. So by far and away top of the table there, Laner. And Lane and Hoffman are neck and neck here at 2 and 3. Pretty decent jump again. and then it's Lane again. Me, Jake, me, Nick Lane, Brinkman. So mostly OGs in this list. Respect. Most passing yards in a single week. That stat is owned by Hoffman. 517 yards, which is absolutely bonkers. I want to say Hoffy had Tom Brady for a period of time. So I will back check myself quick, but that is what I remember from going through these. Yep, he had Tom Brady. So Tom Brady, week 1 of that 2011 year, absolutely torched whoever the heck the Patriots played that week. Brandon Colgan had 510 the next year. Hoffy's back. Hunter Doro, which I think might be the first time we've mentioned him in the record book. So he's up there. Hoffy, George, Lemons, myself, Manti Dillon. These are all 480 plus. These are all pretty close. Good stuff. Most rushing yards in a season, which I looked at this. This was another one that I thought I messed up the programming on, because I'm almost 1,000 yards above any other team, which is absolutely ridiculous. So again, I did a deep dive on this and went through and added them all up. I got exactly 45-30. I think the reason that my 2011 team was just so far and away better than everybody else's in terms of rushing yards was because A, I flexed a running back every single week of that season except for one. B, I made it to the championship game. I did count playoff games in these. Wasn't sure if I should or not, but I am for now, at least. I don't see a problem with that. I think teams should be rewarded for, making that run. So yeah, to drop 4,500. So I think my running backs that year were Shady McCoy, who was absolutely cooking. If he wasn't the RB1, he was the RB2 because he was insane. I had Arian Foster, who was pretty hot and cold, but mostly hot. I had Fred Jackson for a period of time. Cedric Benson, I think I had too. So those guys kind of rotated in. The only week I didn't start 3 running backs was, I think, Fred Jackson and Shady McCoy had the same bye week. So I started the other 2 and flexed in a wide receiver, some bum. I also had Cam Newton for a good chunk of that year, which helped a lot. It must have been one of his first years because he wasn't running a ton. He was averaging, I don't know, probably somewhere in the 20 to 40 yards range, but it's a great boost. So when your other running backs, I did the math on this. If you take this and divide it by 3 running backs, right? So if you ignore Cam Newton's production and give it to the running backs, basically all 3 running backs had to average like almost 100 yards per week. It was really high, which is nuts. So I don't think this will ever be broken, honestly. It's going to be difficult, especially with today's NFL, right, where there's a lot more passing. Running backs get more involved in the passing game. There's fewer and fewer workhorse backfields, right? This is going to be a really tough one to break. The rest of these are a lot closer. Sid, Cade, Dylan, myself a couple times, Lemons, Reckner, George, Hoffy. Those are all pretty close together. As for rushing yards in a single week, I own that record as well. Not surprising based on that total. Granted, these are a lot closer. So my team was just consistently running over everybody. But this is the only record in this top 10 from that year. So the fact that I dropped 4,500 is bonkers to me. So the rest of these, Lane, John, Carter, Greg, John, Cade, myself in a different year, George, Cade. So nothing from the past couple years in those. Lemons, I guess last year I could mention. Oh, and Cade, I missed that. Cade this year, 3,600 rushing yards. Hell yeah, Cade. That's some good stuff. That's a ton of rushing yards. So it's going to be harder and harder to, like I said, I think it's going to be harder and harder to break into this top 5, top 10 as the years go on. Lemons in 2023 had a big rushing yard season. To me, the only way you're getting in this top 10 is if you're flexing a running back at least sometimes and your quarterback runs it a bit. Because this year, Cade had who? Josh Allen, right? So Josh Allen obviously runs it a bit. Yeah, pulling up his team now. Running backs, Saquon had that absolutely historic year. Almost broke the rushing record. It sounds like he's not going to because they're going to sit him down this past week, but he probably could have if he played. He had Tyrone Tracy. Kenneth Walker was probably who was in there most of the time. I know Cade traded a handful of guys too, so, sure there were other guys in there too. But yeah, Josh Allen and Saquon will really do that for a fella. So that's nice. Moving on, receiving yards in a season. This one, Jake in 2018. Hell yeah, dude, almost 6,000 receiving yards. Laner in 2018 as well. Both those guys showing up again in that year. That year was, one for the record books for those two. A lot of, I think Jake had, McCaffrey, who was catching a ton of passes out of the backfield. Lane had the Kelsey Mahomes stack. I think Jake had Hopkins. Lane had Antonio Brown, right? Just guys that were catching passes left, right, and center, right? Laner, myself, Hoffy, Josh Hoffy, George Lane. So pretty tight knit, especially from 10 to 2. Pretty decent jump there, but the rest of them are close enough together. Receiving yards in a single week. Hoffy owns that in 2013 and 14. I'm imagining these are probably Julio Jones weeks because I know he's had a ton of receiving yards back in his day, and that was probably around that time. Because that's a ton of receiving yards. These obviously, similar to the running backs, you're flexing receivers these weeks, right? And your running backs are probably pass catching running backs. There's a lot more ways to get receiving yards these days. All these are pretty tightly knit. They're within 50 yards from top to bottom. 70 yards, but still, between 540 and 607. 607 is so many. That's 60 points on receiving yards alone, man. That's crazy. And then this last one is one that we came up with on the rewind when we rewinded the championship game. So I thought it was a pretty cool idea, so I chucked it in there quick. I was not expecting these results at all, but these are the most rings earned by the actual players, right? The fantasy players. I excluded defenses from this list because I thought over time defenses are going to dominate this list because they stay in the league always, whereas the players retire, right? So AJ Green can't get any more rings, right? Sorry, AJ Green. But the Patriots defense can continue to get rings. I saw them on there a handful of times. So I left defenses out. Kickers I left in. You see a couple of them in here. But AJ Green with 4 rings is funny. I thought that was crazy. I wasn't thinking AJ Green. I was thinking guys like Brady, Rodgers, even maybe Mahomes. Megatron, right? Antonio Brown, I thought could have a shot at this. Those types of guys that were just on those really, really good teams. McCaffrey, obviously. So I thought AJ Green surprised me. I know he was, obviously great in his time, but yeah, Hoffman won him in back-to-back years, kept AJ Green both those years, and then lost him in the sauce somewhere in 2014. Brinkman scooped him up in 15 and 17, probably kept them all through that time. So AJ Green absolutely was cooking people from 2012 to 2017. It's impressive. This one was funny. Brandon Pettigrew. I couldn't even remember who the heck that was. I was like, Brandon Pettigrew. He was a tight end. Played for Detroit at least for a period of time. I didn't look up his whole career history, but he won the first 3 rings in this league. He was on all 3 championship rosters. Me, Lane, and Hoffy. Just for whatever reason, we had him scooped up. So Brandon Pettigrew, he was tight end. I looked up his scores. In those years, he wasn't the starting tight end in any of those teams. He was always on the bench, which I thought was just funny. It's really just dumb luck, right? But he was a decent tight end for those 3 years for fantasy. He averaged somewhere in the 9 to 10 points per game, which is totally serviceable. I know tight ends back in the day were probably a little bit different. I mean, these championship rosters they had Antonio Gates, Vernon Davis, those type of guys. So, Brandon Pettigrew being on there, I thought was pretty funny. Megatron, for obvious reasons. Tyreek Hill is the first active player to be on this list, so he can move up still. Potentially get up there with AJ Green. 16, 17, and 18. Justin Tucker. I would expect to see kickers on here a bit, right? Because they have longer careers, especially guys like Justin Tucker, who are always great. Or except for this year, I guess, but historically great. So I would think that you probably see a decent amount of kickers over the years, but we'll see. DeAndre Hopkins had 3, 18, 19, and this year. Tucker got one this year too from Laners Championship, attaboy. McCaffrey has 3, 18, 19, and 23. A lot of guys from Jake's teams here. Jake must have had some relatively similar teams for those 18 and 19 years, at least the keepers, right? I think it was McCaffrey, Hopkins, and Saquon, maybe? I want to say he traded Saquon in between there. Yeah, I don't remember. Pierre Garcia, there's a ton of people with 2. So many players with 2 rings. So it was just kind of luck of the draw on who got here. I think my macro right now sorts by like oldest year, not intentionally. It just kind of happened to be how it was, and I didn't really have a reason to change it. So Pierre Garçon and Brandon Marshall both got 2. Brandon Marshall getting 2, pretty big gap in between. Probably the biggest gap on this list. Yeah. Matt Bryant's got 2. Fact. I have some honorable mentions for this. I looked up some of the guys that I deleted that. Oh well, I remember it for the most part. But there were some guys on that list that you want to look up, you're interested in. So Mahomes, 0 rings. Rodgers, 0 rings. I think Brady had 2. A bunch of guys had 2. Evan Ingram had 1. Attaboy Laner, way to get him that ring. T-Law obviously had 1 from this year. A couple Jags guys I checked out. Mojo Drew, I think, just had the 1. Antonio Brown just had 1, which surprised me. I remembered him being on Lane's team around like that 2017 to 2019 area before he went crazy. He was just dominating. So his 1 was well before that. He was on it was probably one of his first years in the league. He was on the bench on, I think, one of Hoffy's teams that won it, maybe the 2013 team. I don't remember exactly. Because I don't think he got it with Lane. Lane had him on his team in a couple of years in a row. I think Lane made the championship game in 2 years in a row. If it wasn't 2 years in a row, it was 2 and 3. But Lane couldn't get over the hump, and Jake's team with McCaffrey was just too good. McCaffrey-Hopkins combo. So Kelsey, he had at least 1. He might have had 2. I think he might have had 2. Other than that, there weren't a ton of other surprises. There's just a bunch of no-name guys, right, that were on the bench that have 1. So nothing too crazy, but this was a fun one. I thought this was a pretty cool one to look at. So definitely surprising results. I think Peyton Manning, I didn't see him on the list, so he might have had 0 as well. I found it interesting that a lot of like the really, really good quarterbacks, barring Tom Brady, somehow he wins in this league too. But a lot of the really, really good quarterbacks didn't have rings. Guys like Big Ben had a ring or 2. Stafford had a ring or 2. Those types of quarterbacks, who were good, right? Especially back in the day, they were really good. But I guess probably not quite as expensive as guys like Favre, Rodgers, Peyton Manning, all those guys. So I guess it might have just been partially draft cost. So I guess that wraps it up for the record book. So I hope everyone enjoyed going through. If you're still here, kudos to you. You care about the league. So thanks everyone for tuning into this, I guess, special episode. Like I said, going forward, I'll probably just kind of merge this into the championship one, the championship rewind, and it'll be a lot quicker. We'll just go through, look for 2020. I guess next year we'll look for 2025s, right? So I'll just kind of scan, say, oh, hey, 2025, cool, Greg, longest win streak, that kind of thing, instead of going through the whole shebang again. But since it was the first time, figured we should. So, and maybe next year. I'm not going to hold myself to anything because it's hard to find time to do some of the scripting, and it takes a long time. But maybe I'll have some progress going on individual player tabs. That'd be kind of cool, I think. That's when I think it makes a lot more sense to share it with you guys if you want to look at your stuff. But for the time being, this is what we have. I'll probably post a link to this, like a view-only link, in the group chat after the rewind goes up. That's all I have for today. So once again, I guess thanks everyone for a fantastic season. I hope those that are here enjoyed. And we'll see you guys in, I don't know, probably like May for the fantasy draft? June, July, August? July probably, I guess, for the draft. So thanks everyone. Have yourselves a wonderful first half of the year for those that I don't see / talk to a ton outside of this. See ya.